workshop together here. This workshop is for the purchasing policy. Okay?
Yep.
I guess, I don't know where you want to start. I thought this was pretty well put together here.
Like to hand that out.
So where would you like to start?
Well,
At the last meeting, I asked the question about whether or not it had been reviewed by legal, and during that meeting, Melissa had said that she had given a copy to Justin. I was just curious what Justin's comments were after that meeting.
I took it from a policy I found online. I ran a bunch of policies offline. I didn't think we wanted anything like 18 pages long. I feel like the more complicated it is, the harder it is to follow. So I tried to pick some simple ones. So the one I used was from Cannon Township. It's 2 pages. I basically took their outline and modified some of it to fit Cumberland Township.
And the townships you used
I mean,
were
there's just
similar in
purchases under
size?
3,000 may be made without formal bidding and no prior approval by the township board. So I thought by changing ours to 500 was pretty reasonable, but.
My question was what Justin said, because you'd given him a copy at the meeting,
I
and
did,
he
yes.
seemed to have comments afterwards, so I was curious what his comments were.
He thought it was good. He gave me some suggestions based on yours and Charlie's reaction of how we might want to change it to make it a little accepted better by everybody. But yeah, he didn't seem to have any major disagreements with any of it. So I guess at this point we just need to know, what you guys want to change or add or whatever.
So the policies that you used to create this one though was from similar townships in size too, weren't they?
And one of them was Canton Township, and that's the one
Right,
that we
which
had looked
they're
at
a
their
larger
ethics.
township. They're
Yeah,
like, I think
bigger.
their population is 14,000 something.
Well, that's,
Which is probably why their purchase number is higher. So that's why I adjusted ours to 500 because we're smaller. I tried to make it fit Cumberland.
so I have a question. In reviewing this, and then thinking of what our main intents are when it comes to purchasing, talking to other officials, one of my big questions is this. In an age when we are reachable with the drop of a coin, it is so different than the Paget generation. And it's different because you had to try to find people and then talk to them about it and do a soft vote, call a meeting, try to catch them by phone because nobody carried a phone on them. And I find it interesting because if it's anything more, and I guess I'm going to use specific cases because I think that's the best way to do it. So, specific case, we're going to say we have a furnace issue. If we have a furnace issue, I think it is just as easy to have said, our furnaces are over 25 years old. And I don't think we should expend any resources at this point in time until we do a review of this. But that's not quite what happened. And the bill ran higher than we anticipated. And it's not your fault. I'm just saying, the bill ran higher. We talked about this before. So the other side of the coin would be, you know what? I'm going to send a group text out, similar to what the PC's been doing. Please don't respond to this, but please get back to me. I'd like to know your input. We got one AC unit down. We got an AC unit that's just limping along, and, they're talking major repairs. Here's the thing. We will never get that money out of that AC unit over there because first off, it is so outdated, and it is. And the furnace over here is not exactly brand new. So the efficiency of the newer units and the cost of the newer units may have made better sense to go with the newer unit versus $2,200 repairing two older units. You can buy a brand new air-to-air unit that produces heat as well for $3,000. And we
Okay.
spent, so, you know, when it comes to some of these limits, here's the problem. So if we have a $3,000 limit, it's like no big thing. And I'm gonna stick on that air-to-air unit over there, or those Bunsen burners hanging from the ceiling, and they're just not practical anymore. So what happens is, when I look at this piece of paper, and I was looking at this at 3 o'clock in the morning last night, assessing this whole thing, thinking, what is our true purpose of this? You know what, Sam? If you have to run out because something happened and purchase a couple $100 worth of stuff, I'm not worried about that.
What was the total cost of that, do you remember?
$2,100 or $2,400.
Okay, but, so, again, what, I guess I don't understand what your question, because it says right here, if it's less than 3,000, it needs prior approval by the board. So where are you going with that?
Okay.
What's the point?
Well, let me.
Well, there's a couple points. The other point is we spent $1,190 spraying chemicals that, as a board, when we voted, we said we weren't gonna do that at this
Okay, but
time.
again, that would fall under the second paragraph.
Then why did it happen? That's what I'm asking.
Because we didn't have this.
Wait
That's
a
why
minute.
we're here
What we
tonight.
had was a board vote that said we're not gonna expend any resources on spraying this year. We're gonna take hiatus.
Okay, but
So whether we got this or not, it didn't matter because it was a matter of we're just gonna do this and we don't care. And that's my problem.
That's why we're trying to come up with this tonight. That's why we're here. And I guess I'm just questioning why you shot it down right off the bat, because now all of your reasonings and your justification are irrelevant, because they would all be,
No.
they would all fall under this, that it would need prior approval.
You know what? It's not
So,
irrelevant.
I
You know
guess-
why it's not irrelevant? Here's the fact. The fact was, we as a board sat here and said no. So since we as a board said no, it don't matter if this is signed, sealed, and delivered, we said no, and it still happened, is what my point is. So is this worth the toilet paper it's written on? That's my only question, is if we are going to put together a policy, then we should follow it. And we should have been following the verbal policy all along, and we haven't. And if we don't pay attention to this, by the end of the year, we will have easily expended more than $30,000 just with $500 here and $499 to clean, $300 here. And so my point is, if we're going to continue just to expend money, you know, and we should have a purchase policy, but you know what? Here we go. It says, contract signing and authority is a question with policy. And you know what? That MDOT contract was signed before it ever come to the board. And it was signed back in June. And that, to me, is extremely problematic. Once again telling me this would mean nothing because that was signed.
So I have a different question.
That didn't cost us anything though.
It will, because we gotta maintain
Well,
it.
you did
We've
actually
been maintaining it
parts.
for 22 years.
The thing is, before we sign stuff, that'd be like me going out and signing something and saying, well, I'm a trustee, I can do it, I got a fiduciary responsibility. No, I can't. I'm not being logical and I'm not being fair to the rest of the board.
We were so far away from agreeing on something, I just thought maybe they'd sign their half. But obviously they wouldn't, but
Okay, so my concern is actually page 2. The exceptions to this policy, and then the top line, so V, exceptions to this policy, and the very next line says exceptions from this policy, which just, there's a disagreement in terms there that legally would be an issue. However, as you go through these exceptions, essentially, it's everything. It's everything. vehicle maintenance, equipment maintenance, building and grounds maintenance, utility repairs, drains, sewer and street, general office supplies, postage, copy paper, pens, pencils, additional services may be included as an exception to this policy as the township board deems necessary. So essentially, that exception means,
It's a rule to every exception, an exception to every rule. You can do what you want.
basically that exception means that this policy doesn't mean anything. Because
The verbiage.
everything is covered in there, that's an
These are-
exception.
These are contracts, so we've already signed a contract here.
Or made a verbal agreement. And a verbal agreement is just as equal as the contract. I like this vehicle thing, because when I was speaking with some people today, I said, and I do absolutely love our fire department, I love everything they accomplish, I love every life that they have saved, including my own, but at the same time, one minute we have one vehicle, another minute we have another vehicle, but yet the board never, if this board knew those transitions were happening, I'm sorry, but no, I didn't. So we expended money repairing one vehicle that was state-owned, then we get another state vehicle. Never once have we seen a contract as to what our agreement is with the state of Michigan in reference to it, or the limit of our liability in reference to it. I mean, I'm very confused. And yes, getting a vehicle, immediate change down, 0, yeah. But you know what? So it's had a tune-up, and I think it's had brakes put on it.
By the firemen.
Yeah, but does the fireman actually have a license? Because I tell you something, if that vehicle's in an accident, and we authorize that repair on a brake system, and it's not a licensed brake person, you and I are gonna start living in cardboard boxes. Because the liability goes real, real deep. When we know that when it comes to certain repairs, according to the Michigan Waymaster, you have to have a license on the line that the brakes were done by a licensed person. Maybe the person is licensed, but guess what?
You don't know.
And neither do you. None of us know. That's pretty dangerous. That,
And the fire department must know, one way or the other.
you know what though? The people did not elect the fire department. The people elected all 5 of us. Not me, not just you, but every one of us. And they put equal trust in each of us to protect their village, to protect the people in this village. And you got a vehicle responding to a fire call and the brakes fail, and the state of Michigan does an investigation after they do a chemical test to make sure the person's not on any drugs or alcohol, and they say, wait a minute, who did the repairs to this vehicle? Heck, my van has to be done because it does county contracts. And I can't just have Jim throw brakes on it. He knows how, but it's irrelevant. I have to have a license number written across there that this is who did that. And, you know, when you say, you know, what was your problem with this thing? All the exceptions on the very last page. And that takes me back to the first page to where when we were all talking before, to say that there's like a $500 limit, and if it's anything more than 500, we message each other, and we continue to do the people's business without any problems. And if we all are in agreement to do such thing, no problem. But
Well, in addition to that, the second paragraph under exceptions essentially says if everybody's happy with the services we have, that we don't need to look into that. And that's just, you don't know if your pricing is even competitive if you're not checking it every once in a while. And corporations, every year, rebid things, even if they stay with the same place. They rebid it every year. That's how it goes. You've got to make sure that you're getting a good price and that you have other options. You should at least go through the motions of getting bids and having them in front of you and consider them, even if you stay with the same one. And essentially, this second paragraph says, well, as long as we're good, whatever, we're not going to worry about it. We're just going to keep going with the same people. And it basically says, you know, that's all good. That's all good. You don't need to check. So on what grounds are we saying that we're satisfied? And how is the board even being included in that decision? To dovetail off what Charlie said, all of us are elected by the people. The reason for there being 5 of us on the board is that we have 5 different perspectives, that we have 5 different types of experience, that we can bring things up that maybe other people on the board didn't think about, and the responsibility that we have as a board is to consider what other people are bringing up. Because, I didn't think about that. That's a valid point, right? That's how you actually have a negotiation, a discussion, and figure out what the best way is to move forward. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be happy all the time. But as long as those things are brought to the table and considered, everybody has been heard. And when decisions are made without that, then it changes the complete tenor, because we find out about it after the fact. Now, Charlie's point to whether or not the fireman that did the repairs on that truck is licensed, that could have been a concern that was brought up earlier. Instead, it's all said and done by the time we hear about it. It's already said and done. The swap of the vehicles.
We never saw the first contract, we're already on the second vehicle.
We saw paperwork on what the state signed over to us, because we had to give
I
it
was
to the
given that?
insurance.
I wasn't given that.
You weren't given that.
We asked for it, we never saw
I
it.
requested I requested it, and I received a single page in email months ago, and it was actually dated for a fair amount of time prior to us even being aware of it. We became aware of that vehicle when we saw repairs being done to that vehicle. So those were expenses that were authorized on a vehicle that we had not been even aware was coming to us. And that's where some of the problems come in.
And under purchasing policy, in reviewing different purchasing policies, corporate as well as government, the one thing I don't see anywhere in here is, for instance, you have so many days to produce an invoice to us. I go back to Weiss, an invoice that's dated June, and we get it in September. We get it when really we're at a point where we have 0 options. That we must pay it, or they're going to probably turn us over, take us to small claims, and then we got a whole other issue on our hands. You know what? If that was our company, and you didn't give me that invoice,
They
until
actually didn't send it to us.
yeah, but you know what? If our policy says you have 30 days to submit an invoice, or you have 45 days to submit that invoice, my invoices say you got net 7 to pay me, and after net 7, you know, I don't have to provide you with any service any longer. So when we think of, okay, so we received it on September 1st with services rendered, that would say that the way that they did it on the paperwork was wrong. But the moral of the story is, when we're talking about an invoice that arrives here 90 days later, corporate America doesn't always pay those kind of bills. I received things from Germany, and guess what? I had 14 days to pay for it. Period. It didn't matter if I got the invoice 10 days because the Postal Service brought it to me on a ship. It was from the invoice date and the Wall Street Deutschmark of that day, and you had to pay that invoice. So, you know, this is good, but do we have to go to the next point to say that, you know what? How long can you hold an invoice before you submit the invoice to us? And maybe that doesn't seem like a logical question to you guys, but to me, that kind of makes a little bit of sense. Because if people are gonna, we'll be at the end of the year, and people will be giving us invoices 90 days later, so we won't receive the invoice till May, and we already closed out the previous year. That's a little odd.
I didn't read any of those policies that you had. Melissa? I didn't read any of those policies you had, though, that had a invoice for 30 days, unless I read them all or read it right. Did any of them speak of an invoice?
I've got like 6 or 7 of them here. I'd have to go back to them again.
I don't think there was any that I read that spoke in the purchasing policy of how many days they
A lot of
have
them
to-
will say your invoice must be submitted in a timely manner.
Well, that could be on the bill, that could be on the, but I didn't see anything in the township purchasing policy that said that on it.
I don't know if we have a lot of control over when the people send their bills.
We're doing business with a company, and I'll pick on the one people from that. They cut the grass this month, they have next month to submit the bill. We pay them basically on a net 14, if you actually look at their invoicing. They turn it in on the first, we go through within the first 2 periods, you cut the check and we pay our bills. But we can only do that if people are actually submitting bills to us in a timely manner. And just why Weiss would have, I mean, if it was my company, I would have sent Weiss back a statement and would have said, this work was done in June and you're now asking to be paid in September? May. I would be asking those kind of questions.
So the aquatic people that gave was almost a year late.
That's, well, I'd go right back to them. The aquatic people,
We collected the money from the people in the Coquitlam River.
well, the aquatic though, we didn't, well, let's take the aquatics and let's take the contract. It's a contract between 3 townships, Monitor, Bangor, and Coquitlam. So Monitor, Bangor, and Coquitlam, we are all collecting money. So there is a governmental oversight regarding the funds that we are collecting on people's taxes. And so we collect the money, they give us the billing, we know that there's an annual. Interestingly enough, how that bill slid for such a period of time, that's $1 million question.
Well, and that's not the only time that's
And-
happened.
and
because
we're
we
in
had
a
that one
transition.
software one that we didn't even get the bill for the software for the fire department until after the training's already done and they weren't even using it anymore, and that's when we received the bill.
Yeah,
That's, it's not like that was the only time that's happened. It's actually happened quite a bit. So,
There's nothing in Bangor Township's purchase policy that says anything about that, unless I'm not seeing it, but I don't see anything.
we're here to talk about this. These are my concerns.
so,
When we receive things so far down the road that the asset's dead and gone, just asking the questions.
so one thing that I noticed in the second paragraph, under requisitions, is it says purchases of supplies, materials, equipment, or services over 500, but less than 3,000, may be made without formal bidding. So my question on that would be, are we talking a total contract price? Because I think that's where it gets a little bit questionable. Let's say that you had somebody just, say, mowing the lawn, and they came in at $4.99, right? Or even if they came in at $5.50 each time they mowed, that's not that full contract, right? It would have, the full contract price would be considerably higher than that. So at some point, we would need to actually state that. Otherwise, if you looked at it as a piece by piece, like a per mow, right? Then you could look at that completely differently. And as I said before, if it was $4.99 and you did it per mow, then it would fall under this, we don't need any approval for that. And again, I'm just gonna go back and say, but the way these exceptions are listed, it says that the buildings and ground maintenance are exceptions to this policy, which makes absolutely no sense. I think those exceptions are, honestly, I'd rip that second page right off this. It just basically undoes the entire policy, having those exceptions on there.
There is no
It doesn't make any
policy.
sense.
Because we already know if something happens to any of our emergency vehicles, we give a lot of latitude, because I don't want a single firefighter or paramedic to get into a vehicle and it not be safe. So if the chief notices something is out of sync with one of our vehicles, and you and I know, we walked in and we see him testing hoses, or we see the hoods up, or whatever. But we don't question that.